Ever notice how you can learn a word in another language, think you've got it down pat, and then bam, realize it doesn't quite work the way you thought it did?
Oh, yeah. It happens all the time.
That's exactly what we're tackling today. We're doing a deep dive on a word that trips up a lot of Portuguese speakers learning English.
Uh-huh.
The word traveling. Turns out, directly translating estou viajando to I'm traveling isn't always the smoothest move.
It's so interesting, right, how two words can seem like perfect matches on the surface, but then you dig a little deeper and find all these subtle differences in how they're actually used.
And that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to untangle all the nuances of traveling and hopefully give you, our awesome listeners, some more natural and accurate ways to express that estou viajando feeling in English. And to guide us on this journey, we're turning to the wisdom of Dr. Cooper from the fantastic English by Dr. Cooper YouTube channel, specifically his video titled I'm Traveling Está Errado. Como realmente dizer viajar en inglés.
Yeah, that video is a gold mine of insights.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. Dr. Cooper makes this really important point right off the bat. For a native English speaker, the word traveling usually conjures up this image of the process of getting from one place to another, particularly if it involves a considerable distance. Like picture someone on a plane, a train, a long car ride, that kind of thing.
Right. It's about being in transit, actively moving between locations.
Exactly. Now, viajar in Portuguese definitely has that sense of going from point A to point B, but its main emphasis is often on the idea of taking a trip or being on a trip, which often implies that you've already reached your destination.
Yeah, and that's where things can get a little tricky for Portuguese speakers.
Mm.
Because when you say estou viajando in Portuguese, the listener understands you're currently in a different location, not necessarily in the act of getting there.
It's like the default setting is different for each language?
Absolutely. It's like each language has its own little mental snapshot that pops up when you hear a certain word.
To illustrate this even more clearly, Dr. Cooper tells this great story about his friend Alex, who's from England. He asked Alex what comes to mind when he hears, I'm traveling, and guess what?
I bet it was someone on the move.
Spot on. Alex immediately pictured someone actively traveling between locations using some form of transportation. It just goes to show how these seemingly simple words can pack different meanings depending on the language.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It really is. So, Dr. Cooper points out that this difference in how we perceive traveling can lead to a couple of common hiccups for Portuguese speakers. The first one isn't so much a grammatical error, but it can sound a bit unnatural to a native English hearer. He uses the sentence, last month I traveled to Canada to visit my in-laws, as an example.
Right. And while that sentence isn't technically wrong, it's not how most English speakers would naturally phrase it.
Exactly. It's grammatically sound, but a bit clunky.
Precisely. When you're talking about reaching a destination, especially if the focus isn't on the journey itself, we tend to use the verb go. It just flows more naturally. So instead of last month I traveled to Canada, it would sound more natural to say last month I went to Canada.
Yeah, much smoother.
Plus, it's a lot more concise, which is always a good thing in any language.
Absolutely. Dr. Cooper gives another great example. Instead of saying, next week I'm traveling to South Korea, if your main point is simply that you're going to South Korea, it's more common to say, next week I'm going to South Korea.
Exactly. And he also mentions the verb visit as another option that can work really well in some cases. So there's actually a bit of flexibility depending on the context.
Right. You've got options. Now, the second issue Dr. Cooper brings up is where things can get a bit more, well, let's say, prone to misunderstandings.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it's all about using traveling without actually mentioning your destination when you really mean to say that you're away on a trip.
Oh, I see. You mean when you're already at your destination, but you still say, I'm traveling.
Yeah, exactly. And this can cause some real confusion. Imagine a student texting their professor and saying, I can't go to class today, I'm traveling.
The professor's probably picturing that student stuck at the airport or something.
Exactly. They're thinking, oh, this student is literally in transit. But what if the student is actually already at their destination, maybe chilling on a beach somewhere?
They could definitely lead to some mixed signals.
Big time. And Dr. Cooper shares this hilarious anecdote that perfectly highlights this confusion. He had a student who would constantly tell him they couldn't make it to class because I will be traveling. And for years, Dr. Cooper assumed the student was always on the go, constantly jet setting between places.
Oh, wow.
But it turned out the student simply meant they were in another city away from home. They weren't actually in transit, they were just away.
That's a classic case of a word causing cross-cultural chaos.
Totally. And it shows how important it is to be mindful of these subtle differences in meaning. So if you're at your destination and you want to tell someone in English that you're away, that you're basically estudiando, what's the most natural way to say it?
Well, the most straightforward and effective phrase is simply, I'm away.
I'm away.
Yep. It's clear, concise, and doesn't carry that implication of being in transit. You could say, I'm away for the weekend, or he's away on business, and it immediately tells the listener that you're not in your usual spot.
I'm away. Got it. Now, apart from I'm away, are there any other common and natural ways to express that you're on a trip?
Yes, there are. And this is where we see a slight difference between American and British English.
Uh-oh, here come the variations.
Don't worry, they're pretty straightforward. So in the US, the go-to phrase, especially for longer trips or vacations, is I'm on vacation.
I'm on vacation.
Exactly. And in British English, the equivalent is I'm on holiday.
I'm on holiday.
Yep. Now, as Dr. Cooper points out, many learners might not be aware of these common alternatives, so they might stick with traveling, even when on vacation or on holiday would sound much more natural.
It's those little nuances that can really trip you up when you're learning a new language, right?
Totally. And Dr. Cooker even mentions trying to explain to people who'd say, for example, I'm traveling to a hotel in Northeast Brazil next month, that once they actually get to that hotel, the more natural way to express being on their trip is to say, I'm away, or I'm in location, like I'm in Bahia.
It's all about shifting the focus, right? When you say, I travel to get there, you're emphasizing the act of transportation.
Exactly. But once you're at your destination, you're no longer actively traveling in that primary sense. You're away from your usual routine and location,
You're living the dream.
hopefully. To really drive this point home, Dr. Cooper uses the sentence, traveling with children is difficult. He asks us, the listeners, what comes to mind when we hear that? We might imagine the challenges of keeping kids entertained at a hotel or dealing with meltdowns during sightseeing.
All those lovely parenting joys.
Haha, exactly. But while those are definitely part of the whole trip experience, the first thing that pops into a native English speaker's mind is often the struggle of being in transit with children.
Oh, yeah, the airport chaos.
Precisely. It's about navigating airports with strollers, keeping them occupied on long flights, that kind of thing.
Those tiny humans can be a handful.
No kidding. And to visually reinforce this idea, Dr. Cooper did a really interesting experiment with Google Images.
Oh, tell me more.
He searched for traveling with children, and guess what? About 70% of the pictures that popped up showed kids in planes or airports, actively in the process of traveling. Only around 30% showed families actually at their destination, enjoying their vacation.
Wow, that's a pretty clear visual representation of how traveling is primarily associated with the act of moving from one place to another.
It is, isn't it?
So, just to be clear, Dr. Cooper does clarify that viajar can sometimes be translated as travel in English.
Yes, absolutely. And travel can occasionally refer to the entire trip, including the time you spend at your destination. But he stresses that this is more of a secondary meaning, not the most common or immediate interpretation.
It all comes down to context, as always.
Always.
Now, how about when we want to talk about travel in a more general sense, not related to a specific trip?
In those cases, traveling is definitely the way to go. For example, if you say, I love traveling, you're talking about it as a general activity or a passion. Or traveling alone can be a really rewarding experience.
Yeah.
You're discussing the concept of solo travel as a whole. And of course, the classic, I want to travel the world.
In those instances, traveling fits perfectly.
Perfectly.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the most crucial thing for our listeners to remember about traveling?
The key takeaway is that while traveling and viajar might seem like direct translations, they carry different primary meanings. For native English speakers, traveling is mainly about the act of getting from one place to another, whereas viajar often emphasizes being on a trip, including being at your destination.
So, traveling isn't always wrong when you mean estoy viajando, but understanding its core meaning and having those awesome alternatives like I'm away, I'm on vacation, or I'm on holiday, up your sleeve will help you communicate more clearly and naturally in English.
Ab-
Now, for a final thought to ponder, we've seen how traveling can cause some confusion due to those subtle differences in meaning. But think about other everyday words and phrases in languages you know. Are there any other examples where a seemingly direct translation doesn't quite capture the full meaning or carries a different primary implication?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because recognizing these subtle nuances not only makes you a better communicator, but also gives you a deeper understanding of how different cultures perceive and express the world around them. It's in those little details that the real beauty of language shines through.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. We'll catch you the next episode.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.